Let's start with Cantor Davis.
You spoke about freedom of movement, and recently, the last 2 weeks, we've heard about the tightening of laws by the Israeli authorities, barring entry of foreign nationals into the West Bank. And I want to relate to a fellow resident of Beit Sahur, Mazin Kumsia, who's an American citizen, has American children, but when he wants to go to Jerusalem, he is barred as a Palestinian. So could you speak about the experience of holders of foreign passports under Israeli rule?
And once again, we'll take 3 questions. So, Father Veit.
When we talk about this problem in this country, we hear 3 things. 1, that really isn't a problem. Number 2, although it is a problem and inconveniences Palestinians, it's important for security. And 3rd, but I hear that a lot of checkpoints have been removed. We have trouble convincing people. Can you help us how to address those kind of answers?
And Dr. Amit.
Yeah, in continuation to Father Veit's question, I have seen actually photos showing Palestinian women who are desperate to get work actually going through sewage passages under the wall. Can you talk a little bit about the phenomenon of actual permeability of this so-called wall for Palestinians?
Excellent, thanks. Regarding citizens, American citizens, if they have a Palestinian ID, then they cannot enter Jerusalem. Mazin Kumsiya will not be able to get to Jerusalem. Even his wife will not be able to get there, and his son. So the only people who are lucky enough to enter Jerusalem from the West Bank are the 25,000 people, workers with permits, and the 3,000 who are working with international NGOs, and the 450 VIPs. Out of a population of 4 million Palestinians, that's less than 0.7% of the population. And this is the situation. Regarding the security, I think that General Keith Dutton made clear in his reports to Congress here and to everybody that the security situation in the West Bank is so good now that there is no justification for any of these actions. And I don't see why Israel is keeping this control, unless, as I said, it's humiliation and or to drive us out. The number that I mentioned regarding checkpoints, there were 38 earth mounds that were removed, plus 1 major checkpoint that became permeable, Hawara. Until recently, Hawara, you could not enter with your own car to Nablus. Now you can go with your own car to Nablus. But this was the only thing that changed on the permit regime. And I think that Israel wants to keep these checkpoints every time to show good gestures in order to justify it, so that nobody ask them to remove them and comply with the roadmap. At the same time, what they have done regarding the settlement expansion, in order to avoid more criticism from the Americans and the international community, they will say, we will remove a couple of checkpoints in order to gain the public opinion, or it will be portrayed like this. As for the wall permeability, as I tell you that the wall in the West Bank, it's a hilly area. There is no way by which you can dig under the wall. It's very rocky area. And the wall is not all the time it's a wall, but it could be the other phenomena of the wall is the double-sided fence, which is about 50 to 70 meters wide, and it is more impermeable than the wall itself.
Dr. Talhani.
Thank you. Enlighten me on something. I think I'm pretty sure it's actually true. Doesn't the Geneva Convention guarantee that citizens of an occupied area should get health services, adequate health services? So how do the Israelis justify the fact that they not only impede the delivery of health services because of these checkpoints, but also they're really imposing collective punishment? This is the worst kind of collective punishment. My second question is, it's been suggested that the wall itself actually was built in order to protect the settlers more than anything else. I would like to hear your views on this.
Dr. Sahloul?
Thank you, Jad. We know that there are countries in the world which are very small, like Monaco and Liechtenstein, and they are, self-independent, and they have everything in very small areas of land. So could be this phenomena is a part of a scheme that the Israelis are doing to make the Palestinians are more self-reliant and independent. So instead of having one viable Palestinian state, we will have 10 viable Palestinian states.
I think we'll take actually those two questions and then come to the last two questioners.
Regarding the collective punishment, health, mobility, the right to, these are all violations of the human rights. But Israel's security is used as a justification of these measures. On several occasions, people just died on the checkpoint. There was a case just last week, a 62 years old man from Nablus was going through Hamra checkpoint, and he has a French citizenship, and they delayed him for 2 hours. They wouldn't let him go back, and after 2 hours, he died. And the soldiers did not even say anything. And we didn't hear, by the way, any condemnation from the French government about this incident. And there were several cases where mothers had to deliver their children at the checkpoints, and the soldiers would not let them get to the nearest hospital. So this is a gross violation of human rights, and it's clear it's against Geneva Convention. But Israel does not recognize that the Geneva Convention is applicable to the Palestinian territories. As for the issue of the wall, I tell you that the root of the wall was originally sold as a security issue. But I wish that you go a little bit, you go to the internet and see what Tzivi Livni, who was the Minister of Justice about 6 years ago, when she said it's very clear that the wall is intended to be the final status borders, and it has nothing to do with security. And even the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he was surprised, and he said, but this, my lady, this is not what you condemned it in court. So now there is no justification for the wall, but the wall is still there, and the wall is in all the negotiations that took place after Annapolis and even before. Israel is making it clear that the wall will be the future border for the Palestinian area. But regarding the issue of population density, I wish that what you are saying is true, because when you look at the lands of the Palestinian rural areas, you will find that most of the rural areas, the agricultural land is classified as Area C. And the Palestinian villagers now, villages are becoming refugee camps, a population density of 3 to 4 to 5,000 people per square kilometer. They have been deprived of their land. So again, this is consistent with the policy of land grab and preventing any way of creating a viable, and by the way, I don't like the term viable Palestinian state, because you can make something viable by putting them on oxygen and putting them on life support, and you are a doctor, you know, and by donor money. We want a sustainable Palestinian state, a state that can survive for the generations to come. It means we need to have control over our land and water. Israel is denying us 82% of our waters, denying us our riparian rights to the Jordan River. They are insisting, and this is even coming clear from Prime Minister Netanyahu. He says that in any future arrangement, there will be Israeli control over the Jordan Valley. In other words, there will be always an Israeli presence, and the two-state solution will become not one sitting next to each other like what politicians talk about, but one inside the other. And this one is not, but one's inside the other. There will be about 8 to 10 cantons under Israeli or inside the Israeli state. But that's how they are planning.
Dr. Mearsheimer.
Excuse me. I wanted to pick up on the point that you were just making about what the Israelis are planning. There's much talk in the United States about a two-state solution. And as you know, President Obama and all of his advisors are deeply committed to a two-state solution. But if you look at the facts on the ground in the West Bank and in Gaza, as you described them, and you sort of look at the trajectory over time, how the situation has got worse and worse, the settlements have grown, the number of settlers have grown, the roads have grown in number. It's very difficult to see how you're going to get a two-state solution. And basically what I took you to be saying a few minutes ago is that what the Israelis want to do is confine the Palestinians to a handful of cantons or bantustans, which isn't effectively an apartheid state. And as you know, both former Prime Ministers Olmert and Barak have said that if you don't have a two-state solution, which you seem to make it pretty clear you're not going to get, and which seems to be the case to me, you're going to end up with an apartheid state. Is that your understanding of what's going on here, that you're heading into a South Africa-like situation?
Dr. Ransby.
I want to preface my question with a comment, which is to say, as you've spoken, and I really appreciate your testimony here today and coming so far to make it, and also Jeff Halper's, I'm struck by some similarities between the Palestinian situation and many communities of color in this country. So we framed our discussion a little bit about the freedoms here and the oppression there, and I just want to, it struck me that there are a lot of parallels depending on what communities we look at in this country. But that said, I guess I'd like to ask you how this enormous set of restrictions on mobility has impacted young people, and particularly the criminalization of young people, because it seems to me if you have this plethora of laws and rules and restrictions, just in the course of daily life, many people are going to break the law and break the rules out of necessity. And so I know that many young Palestinian men have been harassed, arrested, jailed as a result of activity that otherwise would seem ordinary and non-threatening. And the other part of that question is to address the question of settler violence, which I think is very real in that experience, and I'd like to ask you to elaborate on that.
That's it. Well, I totally agree with you. The picture is if we follow what's being talked about regarding the plethora of solutions, you don't see too much hope. And I'm afraid that the American foreign policy, which I believe, by the way, the American foreign policy towards the Middle East is foreign to the American values. But they are trying to escape from addressing the issue of the de facto land grab and settlement expansion by saying, okay, let's agree on the borders issue. If we will find a solution to the borders, then we will be able to create the solution for the two states. But then immediately you fall into the trap. A border, according to Israel, should take into consideration the wall. A border should take into consideration that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the state of Israel, and Israel wants the Jordan Valley. My God, so what remains is 60% or so of the West Bank, which I don't think any Palestinian leader will accept. But people are now talking about going back to the Camp David of 2000. In Camp David, the general perception that Ehud Barak gave us everything and it was Arafat who refused. Let me tell you, I was in Camp David. What was offered to us is 62% of the West Bank only. 23% was supposed to be annexed by Israel, and 15% to be leased for extended years to Israel, as if we have more land. We have large areas that we can lease. There has been some talk about scenarios for land swap. But I can tell you that as a Palestinian, I don't want to talk about land swap, because we cannot betray the United Nations system, which says the non-admissibility of acquiring land by force. So we should not start, because if we enter into land swap, we will enter into marathons of land swap, and we know what the Israelis will be offered. They will be offering us the hazardous waste site in Gaza to be added to Gaza, who wants it, or the extreme uninhabitable area south of Hebron, which is totally foreign to anybody. Only crowds can live there, you know. So I don't think that we should accept this, and we should stick to the UN and the international legitimacy and not be tempted to fall into this trap. By the way, if you are interested, there was a study that came recently by the Baker Institute for border scenario for final status, and you can see the huge difference between the Palestinian position and the Israeli position, and it's clear it will not be solved within 8 months or 18 years unless we have one term of reference, and I think the term of reference should be the international law and the UN system. As you're concerned about criminalization, I tend to agree with you. But unfortunately, we, the Palestinians, have no responsibility towards the criminalization that takes place. There is a lot of anger, lots of frustration against the occupier. And this is driving Palestinians, especially the Palestinian youth, towards extremism. So unless they are given hope, they have two options. They either leave the country, and what's happening here is that we have a brain drain in Palestine. Most of our young, educated people are leaving the country because they see no light at the end of the tunnel, or they become, extremists. But the settler violence is adding to that. The rampage. By the way, most of the settlers who are committing these acts are American citizens. Yes, and they live in settlements, ideological settlements, and every week they go and attack the Palestinian farmers next doors. And I think, I don't know the figure, but you can hit on our homepage, they are cutting olive trees which which are older than Israel itself, in order to prevent the Palestinian farmer from their livelihood. And they get away with it. I haven't seen one settler put in jail for cutting Palestinian trees or for humiliating a Palestinian farmer or a Palestinian citizen. This is what is driving the deep frustration among the Palestinian youth.
I'd just like to ask one last short question, Dr. Ishaq, and that's about the movement control regime between Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank and how Oslo affected that.
Entrance to Jerusalem, the checkpoints allowing Palestinians to enter Jerusalem became effective only after Oslo. Before Oslo, we had access all the time to Jerusalem. But in 1995, Israel put these checkpoints, the new gates to Jerusalem. There are 10 of them now. And entrance to these checkpoints is totally restricted to the people I mentioned, the 25 plus the 500. Now, with the wall, something else happened. With the wall, more Palestinians found themselves in enclaves that they have to go through like different checkpoints in order to get from one part of the city, although they carry the Jerusalem IDs. And you don't have to be a genius to realize that the ultimate goal is to drive 160,000 Palestinian Jerusalemites out of Jerusalem through this permit regime. I'm talking about people in, and this, by the way, this has been made clear even several times by the current Israeli Interior Minister and by the Prime Ministers Olmert, Barak. Netanyahu did not say it so far. Where they said, we are willing to give Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem to become under Palestinian authority. In other words, East Jerusalem will be divided, not all of Jerusalem. East Jerusalem will be divided. The Palestinian areas in East Jerusalem will be handed to the PA and the rest will become Israeli. According to the Jerusalem 2020 plan, 13% of East Jerusalem will be for the Palestinians. 87% will be for Israelis, which means that the current percentage where in the Jerusalem boundary there are 33% Palestinians, this percentage will go down to 15%, and if these areas will be moved, the only people will, the only Palestinians in Jerusalem will be those in the old city and in Silwan, and what will be left in Sheikh Jarrah, in what they call the Holy Basin. In other words, the Palestinian population would be less than 5%.
Thank you so much. It all seems very depressing, what we have heard, but I think the most important thing is that we have all come together to hear this today and to listen to the ground truth that you have been telling us. I think it will take us a little bit of time to process what we're hearing.